As we start our time together today, I'd like to start with a question. Has anybody ever blamed you for their bad idea? They tried something, it didn't work out, and then they said, what were you doing? Why did you do this? And it wasn't even your idea, it was theirs. And they dragged you in. Anybody ever been in a situation like that? Anybody have a story they want to share like that? Well, good. Nobody's had that happen to them. I guess. That's good to hear. Well, today we're going to look at somebody who has. I've been teasing Ray a little bit about how our 50 chapters of the Bible is going to end up being 50 weeks in Genesis. And I think he took that personally because last week he went through 13 chapters in a week covering Abraham's life. So today I'm going to actually stay with Abraham, but dig in a little bit deeper in a couple of those chapters that we covered just briefly last week. And specifically, I want to look at Hagar. Last time that I was able to lead our group, we did a compare and a contrast and had a chart comparing a chapter in the Old Testament with one in the New Testament. And you guys seem to like that pretty well. So I'm going to do something similar today with Abraham and Hagar and compare those two. So let's start by reading chapter 16. And as I mentioned a minute ago, we're going to hear about Abraham getting blamed for someone else's bad idea. And take it from there. So we've got a few passages to read today, 3 different ones, but I'd like to start with Genesis 16, 1 through 16. And I wonder if somebody would read that for us. Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 16. Would somebody offer to read that for us? Got it. A few volunteers, but I think I heard Mary Esther first.
Now Sarai, Abram's wife, who had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, Now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my maid, perhaps I shall obtain children through her. And then Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. And after Abram had lived many years in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, the Egyptian, her maid, and gave him to her husband Abraham as his wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her sight. And Sarai said to Abraham, May the wrong done to me upon you. I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me. Abram said to Sarai, Behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight. So Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence.
And we can keep going to 16 if somebody wants to pick up at verse 7 and read that next section. 7 through 16.
7 through 1.
16.
16. 17.
Yeah, Genesis chapter 16, and then we'll start at verse 7 and go through verse 16.
Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to shore. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going? And she said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, Return to your mistress and submit yourself to her authority. Moreover, the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly multiply your descendants, so they shall be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. And he will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. And he will live to the east of all of his brothers. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. Thou art a God who sees, for she said, Have I even remained alive here after seeing him? Therefore the well was called
Be'er Lahai-Roi, it's Hebrew. A little tricky.
Behold, it will be between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him.
All right, thank you, Mary Esther and Larry. So let's kind of go back through that and summarize what happened here. Would somebody like to give us that synopsis? Or take a stab at it, and we'll do it as a group.
It looks like when Hagar figured out she was pregnant, she got real nasty with Sarah, because she said, you couldn't conceive, I can.
That could be that.
That could have been, well, it kinda indicates that they were at odds with each other anyway.
Right.
But, that gave her a big plus in her own eyes. And the way people thought back then, I think that was real important, because
Absolutely.
a barren woman was considered to have some sort of a curse on them.
Mhm.
And, then later on, you know, it does get even more complicated when Sarah gets pregnant. Well, I have always had a personal dislike for this whole operation, this whole, part of the story.
Mhm.
Because I thought that the whole idea sounded good in the beginning, but I sided with Hagar. I thought she was victimized by that.
Yeah.
And I think that, Ishmael ended up being an outlaw because he was cast out like that.
Right.
Yep.
If I'm not
We'll get to that
mistaken,
part.
he was an archer. That was his skill.
Yeah, we'll get to that part too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, anyhow, he went on and made a life for himself, but I think, it was Brother Ray I was talking to about this, and he said that, Ishmael's offspring all ended up at war with each other.
Mhm.
There was a lot of turmoil that sprung from him.
Right.
And, I've never quite gotten all that focused, but every time I look at that story, I tend to sympathize with Hagar and Ishmael.
Yeah.
Maybe that's wrong, but it got, Abram off on the wrong foot, because I don't think the Lord liked that either.
Right.
I don't
Well,
think he was totally pleased with everything Abram did.
and I think that's a good point, because whose idea was it? It wasn't God saying, hey, go do this.
That was Sarah's idea.
It was Sarah's idea, right? So, so it was her idea, and in my opinion, it was their impatience. You know, God had given them a promise and said, you're gonna have a great nation, and they're going, well, how are we gonna have a great nation of people if we don't even have a son? We don't have any kids.
I never really
So-
thought about it like that.
So I think they kind of took things into their own hands. So that's why I asked that question I did at the beginning. The way I see it is Sarah got impatient. She had it, okay, let's just kind of get this going here, right? So I got this woman here. You could start your family with her, and then that'll give us the great nation. Not what God commanded them to do. But then she blamed Abraham for it after, right? Said, what were you doing? You know, and when she says, may the Lord judge between you and me, it's basically a way of saying, you know, I'm mad at you, and I hope that whoever's wrong here, God judges, implying that he was the one who was wrong, even though
Was it,
it's her idea.
did they, at this point, was it common for them, especially somebody who's wealthy like Abraham, to have more than one wife?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not entirely sure, but I think so.
The Israelites were polygamous all the way through
Right.
the Old
Yeah,
Testament.
they didn't really have monogamy until later, from the way I understand things. And of course, later than this, of course, David and Solomon and that era, they had lots of wives and concubines. But
Solomon paraded his. He put them on floats and run them
Right.
around to show you how many.
right. But this early on,
Smart guy.
I don't know how common it was this early on, but I think it was still common for that to happen. But it's interesting that, you know, you talked to Meryl about how she was kind of elevated. You know, she went from being a slave girl to elevated to being his wife, which really put her on the same plane as Sarah, because Sarah was his wife. So now he's got two wives. So she went from being the slave below the master to being on par. And I sense that that's where a lot of that resentment came from. You know, like you said, especially her being the barren one, and then Hagar not being the barren one. So Sarah made this suggestion. Then she got jealous. She blamed Abram. She mistreated Hagar. Hagar fled. Then what happened after that, after she fled?
She was found
Right.
by God.
Yes.
God spoke to her through an angel.
Right. So God found her in the desert, spoke to her through the angel.
Sent her back home.
Right. Said, go on back home. And also told her that she was pregnant and instructed her to name the son Ishmael. By the way, of course, names in the Old Testament are always meaningful. They were signified things. And so Ishmael means God hears. And so name him God hears, because God heard. God heard your cry, so name him God hears. And then she told him that Ishmael would live in hostility toward his brothers. Of course, there's an implication there too. Well, he's going to have more brothers. This isn't it, because, you know, Sarah and Abram think this is it. We got to have a kid. And all of a sudden she already knows there's going to be brothers coming into the picture. So that's telling as well. So then she called God, the Hebrew word here is El Roy, the one who sees. It says, you are the God who sees me, is the way that that my translation phrases it. And then at the end of the chapter, Ishmael was born. So a few things that really jumped out to me about that. Number one is that God went to look for Hagar. I think that's really important. We'll get to that a little bit more. Then also, Hagar was the first woman to have what's called a theophany. A theophany, which it's a divine appearance, seeing God, right? So God appeared to her. The theophany, that only happens a few times in the Bible, where God appears to someone through an angel, or the other times where they see God's back, things like that. Those are called theophanies. So this is the first woman to have a theophany. Of course, Mary had an angel that shared with her. Samson's mother, if I remember correctly, was another woman, had a theophany, but there are only a few, especially women, that have a theophany. So that's a big thing. Also, it's big that Hagar gave God a name, like I said, El Roy. That's not a typical thing that you see. And then Hagar was also the first person to receive an annunciation, where an angel came and announced a birth, right? We have that happen a few other times in the Bible, but this is the first annunciation in the Bible. So a few really unique things about Genesis chapter 16. So keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to put that together with the other chapter in Genesis that talks more about Hagar as well. Let's flip ahead a few chapters to Genesis 21. And we're going to read the first 21 verses. So I didn't just do this for the parallel here. We read 16 verses of Genesis 16. We're going to read 21 verses of 21. It's not just because that's the number of the chapter, but a good place to stop. So would somebody read the first 7 verses, and then we'll read 8 through 21.
I'll read.
Okay.
The Lord cared for Sarah as he had said, and did for her what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. Everything happened at the time God had said it would. Abraham named his son Isaac, the son Sarah gave birth to. He circumcised Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh. Everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. No one thought that I would be able to have Abram's child, but even though Abram is old, I have given him a son. Is that as far as I want? How far?
That's fine. Yeah, I thought that'd be a good place to change, but you can keep going if you want.
Okay. Isaac grew, and when he became old enough to eat food, Abram gave a great feast. But Sarah saw Ishmael making fun of Isaac. Ishmael was the son of Abram by Hagar, Sarah's Egyptian slave. So Sarah said to Abram, throw out this slave woman and her son. Her son should not inherit anything. My son Isaac should receive it all. This troubled Abram very much, because Ishmael was also his son. But God said to Abram, don't be troubled about the boy and the slave woman. Do whatever Sarah tells you. The descendants I promised you will be from Isaac. I will also make the descendants of Ishmael into a great nation, because he is your son too. Is that good?
Sure. And then we'll have somebody read 14 through 21, if somebody would do that for us. Okay.
So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and his skin water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water in the skin was used up, and she left the boy under one of the bushes. And she went and sat down opposite him, about a bow shot away, for she said, do not let me see the boy die. And she sat opposite him and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the lad crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter with you, Hagar? Do not fear God, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water, and she gave the lad a drink. You want me to go on?
Sure, let's do 2 more verses.
And God was with the lad, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness and became an archer. And he lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so let's kind of walk through that. We've heard Genesis 16, now this is Genesis 21. What happens here?
That's where Sarah has the baby.
Right, so Isaac is born to Sarah.
Yeah.
And of course, by this time, Abraham and Sarah's names have been changed. So earlier we were talking about Abram and Sarai, and here we have Abraham and Sarah. Both of their names have been changed. So same people. So Abraham is and Sarah have Isaac. And then what happens? They have a big feast the day that he's weaned, right? He can eat food, so let's have a feast. And what happens at the feast?
She saw Ishmael making fun of Isaac.
Right. So she sees Ishmael. My translation says mocking. Yours might say making fun. It might say laughing. So she sees Ishmael mocking and told Abraham to get rid of him. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So Abraham didn't like that. He was concerned about sending them out, but God shared the promise to make Ishmael into a nation too, and said it's okay, just let it go. Then the angel of the Lord spoke again to Hagar, shared the same promise with her, and then provided them a well to drink from. So what's up with all the laughing? There's a lot of laughing going on here, right? Anybody want to give their thoughts on the laughing?
Well, Sarah thought the people would laugh at her because she was old
Right.
when Isaac was born.
Right, so Abraham's 100, Sarah's 90. I don't think anyone in this room is yet 90, but can you imagine when you get to be 90 having a baby?
No.
There's some laughing going on right now, so you see,
Before.
you see why Sarah's laughing. Like, can you imagine having a baby at 90 years old?
It says in my Bible that her friends laughed with her, not at her.
Right, no, they're laughing.
So she was saying, how about that, I'm pregnant? Oh, yeah, sure you are.
Yeah, I mean,
They had a big laugh over that, and it turned out it was true.
yeah, it seems pretty funny. So, Isaac is named Isaac because Isaac means he laughs. So there's a lot of laughter going on. Isaac is named after that. And what I think is interesting about this is Sarah in verse 6 says, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. So everybody's going to laugh when they hear it. But then the laughter turns, doesn't it? So now we have Ishmael laughing. Ishmael's probably a teenager by this time, probably 17, 18 years old, because you remember Abraham was 83, I believe it said, when Ishmael was born. So
I think he was about 14, wasn't he?
So, well, if he's 83 and now he's 100, then it'd be about 17.
17.
And if he's been weaned by now, maybe 18. But anyway, an older teenager, and we know how teenagers can be. So, but now we have Ishmael laughing. It's the same verb. So it might be translated mocking or making fun of or something like that, but it's the same word. So everybody's laughing. Oh, but Ishmael, you can't laugh. Get out. I think that's pretty interesting there. You know, everybody else gets to laugh, but Ishmael doesn't get to laugh. And of course, it might be a little bit different because it does sound like that he was laughing at Isaac, not with them. But still, I just think that's interesting that there's that connection with the laughter. Everybody can laugh, but not you, Ishmael. Get out. Abraham and Sarah had both laughed in disbelief themselves previously. In chapter 17, if we go back there, would somebody read Genesis 17, 15 through 19?
Oh, I can do it. God said to Abraham, I will change the name of Sarah, your wife, Sarai, I can't remember, Sarai.
Close enough.
Your wife to Sarah. I will bless her and give her a son, and you will be the father. She will be the mother of many nations. Kings of nations will come from her. Abraham bowed face down on the ground and laughed. He said to himself, can a man have a child when he is 100 years old? Can Sarah give birth to a child when she is 90? Then Abraham said to God, please let Ishmael be the son you promised. God said, no, Sarah, your wife, will have a son, and you will name him Isaac. I will make my agreement with him to be an agreement that continues forever with all his descendants. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will bless him and give him many descendants, and I will cause their numbers to grow greatly. He will be the father of 12 great leaders, and I will make him into a great nation.
We can stop there.
Okay.
Thank you, Judy. So what's Abraham's reaction when he finds out? He laughs, right? Then if we look at chapter 18, go forward a little bit. Let's read 18, 10 through 14.
Before we move, can I have a question?
Sure, absolutely.
And this is probably a real ignorant question.
No, it's fine. No bad question.
It says that he was talking about Ishmael, it said, I will have heard you, and I will bless him, and will make him fruitful. He shall become the father of 12 princes.
Mm-hmm. So, basically he's going to
I
have...
missed that part somewhere in there.
What's that?
I said, I must have missed that part
Yeah.
somewhere in
Well,
there.
we were talking earlier about how there was some disagreement between his ancestors. So, and it's also interesting to me that there's 12 of them, because obviously there's the 12 tribes of Israel.
Right.
So Isaac ends up with the 12 tribes after Jacob, 12 tribes of Israel. Ishmael also has 12 tribes. So there's
Okay.
kind of a similarity between the two here. So they're really both getting some of the same things. They're both becoming a great nation. They're both getting the 12 different rulers. So there's some similarity there, but that's all through Ishmael too. But Abraham's first reaction when he finds out about this, he laughs. And then we go over to chapter 18, and let's read verses 10 through 14. Genesis 18, start with 10. Go through 14. Would somebody read that?
I'll read it.
Okay. Actually, go through 15.
Okay. Then the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did laugh.
So she doesn't even want to admit that she laughs, right? She laughed, but she didn't want to admit it, but she did. So Abraham laughs, Sarah laughs. Then Sarah says later on, everybody's going to laugh when they find out about this. And of course we did too, a minute ago when we thought about, imagine being 90 years old and having a child. But God says nothing's too hard for the Lord. If you think about it, in the New Testament, we have Mary having Jesus when she hasn't even conceived. So, there's nothing that's too hard for God. He can make anything happen. So, but lots of laughter going on. But then, as we talked about, when Ishmael is the one who laughs, doesn't go so well. It says to get out. And why do you think that Sarah reacted that way? Why was she upset about Ishmael laughing or mocking, making fun of, whatever you want to call them? What does it say in verse 10?
She didn't want to Isaac to share his inheritance with Ishmael.
Right.
Ishmael.
So it almost sounds to me like that his laughter was because of the inheritance. Hey, we're going to split this inheritance, or I'm the firstborn, so I really get the inheritance. And that's kind of where his mind had gone, making fun of this little child that is supposed to be the father of the great nation. But hey, look at me, I was actually born first. I'm the firstborn, and I'm going to get at least a share of the inheritance. And so Sarah said, I don't think so. Get out of town. So complicated stuff. But once again, God heard, right? They go out to the desert, and God heard them. Something else that's just a little interesting aside, at the very end, Hagar was the only woman in the Old Testament to arrange a marriage for her son. It says that while they were living in the desert, his mother got a wife for him in Egypt. So doesn't really matter, just thought that might be something, a little extra tidbit that you might find interesting. But he grew up in the desert. Like we said, he became an archer. And then he had his 12 sons as well, the 12 rulers that came from him. So what I want to do, like I said, last time we looked at a little comparison chart. So I'll pass these around. Just want to compare Abraham and Hagar because I think there's some interesting correlations between the two. And I'll give you guys a second to get those passed around, and then we'll take a look at that sheet there.
I can relate to this personally because it substantiates one of the songs I wrote.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's called Two Women and One Too Many. That's the title.
It does make those
Don't laugh, it only
relationships.
encourages him.
Does make those relationships complicated, doesn't it? So there are 6 things. Everybody doesn't have the sheet yet. I'll give you a second, but there are 6 things where I think we can see a correlation between Abraham and Hagar.
Paper's thick. Paper's thick.
Sticking together or something? So on the chart, I've put the 6 categories, but then also printed the relevant verses here to make it easy because I don't want us to have to jump around a bunch. So the first thing that you'll see, if you look at the top there now that everybody's got one, is divine communication. We talked about how the angel of the Lord spoke to Hagar, but also God spoke directly to Abram in chapter 12, and then again in chapter 15, and then again in chapter 17. So God is speaking directly to both of them. I gave 15 as the example here. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. Like I said, also chapter 12, chapter 17. And then in 17, the angel speaks to Hagar. It says, the angel of the Lord called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. And also chapter 16, there's 2 different times. So on multiple occasions, God speaks directly both of them. The second thing is the promise. God promised countless offspring to Abram. It says in 15:5, he took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. But he made that same promise to Ishmael. So Hagar is promised numerous descendants through Ishmael. The angel added in Genesis 16:10, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The third thing is the journey. Abram was called to leave home and go to unfamiliar territory. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Genesis 12:1. For Hagar, she was kicked out and fled to the wilderness while she was pregnant. And then, of course, that happened again in chapter 21, as we read. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. So both are leaving home and going somewhere else unfamiliar. The fourth one is the role. Abraham is the father of a great nation. Genesis 12:2, he says, I will make you into a great nation. Hagar is the mother of a great nation through Ishmael. I will make the son of the slave into a great nation also, because he is your offspring. That's Genesis 21:13. The next one is each experienced some grief. Abraham pled for Ishmael. In Genesis 17, Abram said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. That verse we read earlier, 17:18. Hagar also wept for Ishmael. Genesis 21:16 says, then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. As she sat there, she began to sob. And then the final thing is God's response. God heard Abraham's prayers. This is Genesis 17:20. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful, and he will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers. I will make him into a great nation. God also heard Ishmael's cries. In Genesis 21, verse 17, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said, what's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. So you could say that's just a big coincidence, but I don't think so. I think that there's so much in common with these two for a reason. We talked about how Abraham and Sarah were impatient, and that elevated Hagar from a slave to being the mother of the nation, placing her almost on par with her master Sarah. So I think that because of that, we see all these similarities between Abraham and Hagar.
There was no prohibition against elevating a slave girl to a wife?
Apparently not, because it happens.
No. Well, no, I just wonder, because that's two different statuses completely.
Absolutely,
I've
yeah.
never seen anything saying there's anything against it,
Right,
so
Yeah,
that,
I
I
wondered
don't,
that too.
yeah.
well, I don't think that was it might have seemed a little odd, there's people around him, but I don't think it was unheard of.
Right, I definitely agree. I think it was odd, but I think that as the slave owner, they had that
Well,
choice.
that elevated Hagar to the same level Sarai was on.
Right, right,
And,
which is
that's
what led
where
to
the
that.
trouble started right
Yeah,
there.
it led to the jealousy and led to the
Yep.
kicking her out. This is gonna sound like I'm just coming straight out of left field and changing the subject entirely, but when you get there, you'll see why. Let's turn to Galatians, chapter 4.
Okay.
So all the way to the other end of the Bible. Galatians chapter 4, we're gonna read verses 21 through 31. There's another similarity I didn't put on the chart, and I've saved it for here. So would somebody offer to read this for us?
What was it? Galatians what?
Galatians 4, 21 through 31.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Tell me, you who want to be under law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the bondwoman and one by the free woman. But the son by the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and the son by the free woman through the promise. This is allegorically speaking, for these women are 2 covenants, one proceeding from Mount Sinai, bearing children who are to be slaves. She is Hagar. How far do you want me to read?
Through the end of the chapter.
Okay. Now, this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she was in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother. For it is written, Rejoice, buried woman who does not bear. Break forth and shout, you who are not in labor. For more are the children of the desolate than of the one who has a husband. And you, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise. But as at that time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now also. But what does the Scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be an heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of a bondwoman, but of the free woman.
Thank you, Mary Esther. So
What does it say here?
Paul goes back to this story in Galatians and picks it up. We'll talk a little bit about what happened before the part we read in just a second, but just to summarize really quickly, Paul says Abraham had 2 sons, one by the slave woman, meaning Hagar, one by the free woman, meaning Sarah. But then he puts a new spin on it, and he says that we, like Isaac, are children of the promise, not children of the flesh, is the comparison that he makes. So he's saying it's not because of their ethnicity, it's not because of their descendants, it's because, that says in verse 29, by the power of the Spirit. So we are all children of promise, like Isaac, by the power of the Spirit, is the way that Paul says it. So a different spin on it. It says Ishmael in verse 30 does not share in the inheritance with Isaac. We talked about that earlier. But then he says, we are the children of Sarah, the free woman, because we know God. That's what he says in verse 31. But then before that, in verse 8, he says, we were slaves back when we did not know God. So basically, he says that we are like Ishmael, children of slavery, when we didn't know God. But now that we do, we are children of Sarah, like Isaac is. 1 Timothy 2:4, I think, goes with this, where it says that God wants all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So basically, God wants everyone to be in Isaac's camp, not in Ishmael's camp, to be children of that promise. Of course, that promise that he's talking about is that promise of inheriting that kingdom, going to be with him forever in heaven, is what he's talking about there. So does that all make sense? I know it's a different spin on it, and this might be a passage that you haven't read a lot or studied a lot before. but I think that this one additional difference to point out is very important. There's something that you might notice too when you look at Abraham and Sarah and the way that they referred to Hagar and Ishmael in Genesis. You'll notice they never called them by name. Abraham and Sarah both refer to Hagar simply as the slave woman and refer to Ishmael as the son of the slave woman. And then later, you can tell that Sarah thinks of them as a threat, right? So they don't think of them as who they are. They think of them as what they are. They're a slave, they're son of the slave, and they're these people who are threatening us. But what did God do? God called them by name. He heard their cries. He saw their pain, and he rescued them. And so my challenge to us today as we close is to think about those foreigners, those outsiders, those enemies, however you want to think of them. How, when we encounter somebody who we think of as an outsider or even as an enemy, how do we think of them? Do we think of them the way that Sarah saw them? Or do we think of them the way that God saw them? Do we think of them as what they are? Oh, that's just an enemy, that's just a threat. Or do we think of them as who they are? Do we think of them, call them by name? Do we hear their cries? Do we see their pain? It's hard when somebody is an enemy, right? To think of them that way, to think of them the way that God sees them. But that, I think, is our challenge as Christians, is no matter who somebody is, no matter what threat they might pose to us, to think of them the way that God thinks of them. So let me pray and then we'll be dismissed today. God, we just thank you for this time that we've had together to study your word, to consider the stories of Abraham and Hagar, to see how even though Hagar was someone who started her life as a very low status, the slave of Sarah, God, we know that she was elevated to that higher status. And God, I think it's so important that we remember that you don't see us by our status, you don't see us by what we are, you don't see us by our limitations, but you love us, you see us, you hear us, you call us by name, and that we can all be your children, those children of the inheritance, as Galatians says. So God, I pray that as we see other people in our life, as we see other people in the world, God, that we would see them and know them the way that you see them and know them, and that we would love them just the same, and that we would want to share that inheritance with them too, God, that we would be able to share your love for them and be able to witness to them, be able to reach out to them and show them who they can be through you. So God, we ask all these things in your name. Amen.